record button. This
All
meeting
right.
is being recorded. I know. Shut up, Zoom. If you can't tell, this happened with two different computers. Let's rock and roll. Are you ready?
I think so.
Okay. Kick it off, lady.
Let's do it. Hello, everyone. This week on American Salad, we are actually coming to you from two opposite coasts. So this is our first week where Martin is officially on the East Coast and I am officially on the West Coast, which is kind of crazy if you think about it.
I've officially been on the East Coast the entire time. So, in
This is the
fairness,
first time that we're on opposite.
yeah, I know what you're saying. I'm just being difficult. But yes, Moira finally landed out in Los Angeles and Anaheim, all the same. And it's going great for her, sort of. It got great the past like 2 days. The days before apparently were quite not great. But before we get into all that, like, follow, subscribe on all your social media platforms and on all the podcast platforms. Y'all know where to support the show. On our Teespring shop, get some merch. It looks great. It's very comfortable. Yeah, if you don't give us 5 stars, the wise words of Bomani Jones, you are a hater. So yeah, Moira, tell us about LA before we get into our topics of the day, Cuba and Afghanistan, which are not going to be all that fun. So we're going to have fun right now.
Yeah, we've got to lighten it up now because it's going to get real intense in just a couple minutes. But yeah, the weather's wonderful. I will say it's rained twice in the last week, which I was told doesn't happen here, but I guess the East Coasters are bringing an end to the drought. You're welcome. So yeah, it's been stressful. It's been very financially stressful. I highly recommend, if you decide to move out here, to have 8 to 10 grand saved up, because you will spend close to that or that, depending on what you're doing. Mostly on rent. Rent is a pain, but yeah, it's been interesting. Drove out to Newport Beach yesterday, which was really nice, really beautiful. I really love how no one really cares here. Like, just people can come as they are, even though like everyone dresses nice. Like, people don't care about body hair, who you're with, who you're holding hands with. Like, people are just like existing in their space, and I can get on board with that. I love that. It's a really different kind of culture than I was living in Georgia. So excited to keep exploring.
Happy to hear that it's going well at this point. I mean, you were eating some donuts before we started recording and they looked good. I'm not gonna lie. The peach one I wasn't super here for, but no, we're great. It's I don't like peaches. It's just how it is. But no, very, very much looking forward to what's going to happen for you next. However long you decide to stay out there before you inevitably come back to the best coast in this part of the country. But yeah, it's great. It's great to see. And Dewey's doing better, so that's also nice. But yeah. How far is Newport Beach from your crib?
About 30 minutes. That's without traffic. I drove, to be fair, I drove over at around 8:30 in the morning on a Saturday.
Oh, okay, that helps.
Yeah.
And so, was it already raining then?
It was already raining.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I fully saw people pull off the side of the road and it was drizzling. It wasn't even like fully raining.
Some people are soft, man.
I was shook to my core. I was like, I'm used to like torrential downpour.
Yeah.
So the drizzling was like, all right, this is what it is.
Yeah.
But man, like, it started drizzling and like people were fully just like pulling off and like waiting, and I was like, all right, I guess we're just
that happened to me last week. That happened to me last week when I was driving back from Cincinnati. I had a whole full-on New Delhi monsoon, and I see some people pulling off the side of the road. I'm like, this is nasty, but I don't think this is going to stop soon. Have you seen those clouds? I mean, you can't even see them because it's raining so hard. So maybe we should just keep it moving. But yeah. You clearly, yes, you stop the drought. Y'all all gonna have water to use. Y'all can eventually get some actual lawns if that's what y'all are about. But besides that, it's going great out in California. We love to see it. And you start your job tomorrow, so the new job. It's gonna be
Yeah.
great. You can be a full on. Do you already say who you're working for? Do you talk about that?
Not yet. And I think we should hold off depending on how things go over the next few weeks, just to make sure that we've got like solid stories.
Yes, that we secure the bag still. Yes, fair. It can all go poorly very quickly if it's like that. Very fair. All right. Well, no real updates from me. I'm just doing my normal thing. Moira makes all the moves over there. So let's just get into it. Let's start talking about
Well, although
Cuba.
at some point you do have to advertise what your upcoming plans are for the fall.
Yeah. So yeah. That's not talk. Yeah. That'll happen in September. The actual like official day will be in October, but like the hype will be in September. So we'll get to that, people. Don't worry about it. It'll be fun. I already told you that I got some samples this week, and they're nice. So we're supposed to get another one tomorrow, so that's gonna be dope. But yeah, we'll get to all that in a few weeks. It'll be fun. And hopefully, so actually, before we even get to Cuba, let's talk about this competition that we're going to get into with Launchpad One and
Yes.
Self-Made. It is a podcast competition where just different podcasters submit their shows to get judged, and the winners, the top 5, are able to interview someone that's a part of the Launchpad One podcast network, which is great. That's super cool. And then if you win, you get $100,000 in like a branding collaboration deal with Launchpad One. So that would be obviously great for us. So we'll be putting out more details about that on all of the socials, mine, Moira's, and the shows. But watch out for that. We'll keep on listening to the episodes, re-listen to episodes. All of that helps us out because we want to, y'all want us to get paid so we can make some nicer stuff because we all want this to be great. So, but yeah, that's what we really had to update y'all on before we get into what's happening over in Cuba.
Yeah. The Cuba issue is it's a lot harder to talk about than I thought it was going to be. I am half Cuban. My mom immigrated to the US with her parents and most of our extended family when she was about 11 years old. They fled the country. It was a situation where my grandfather was actually put into jail because he was accused of having guns on his property. And so the government incarcerated him and told the family that in order for him to be released, the entire family had to leave. There was a quota system in order to enter the US at the time. And so some of the family was able to get into the US while my grandparents, my mom, and countless other Cubans went through Spain before they were able to come to the US. And so there's a lot of pain that comes with my family telling stories of Cuba and leaving. And I think there was some attention drawn to the Cuban American population in America during the elections last year because the Trump campaign launched a very successful smear campaign against the Biden campaign, accusing the Democrats of being socialists and communists. And in Miami, that was very successful. The area did go to Trump. And a lot of that has to do with like the intergenerational trauma that is just imbued with the people. Like, if there's any risk that someone is going to be like communist, or I think initially Castro proclaimed himself to be a socialist, which means that people associate socialism to communism because they believe that because Castro started out claiming he was a socialist and ended up being a communist, that that's the case with everyone. It's not an accurate way to think about how politics work or how people's ideologies work, but it is unfortunately the way that things have just kind of settled psychologically with a lot of Cubans who've moved to Miami especially. And so I think we see the beginnings there of how painful this history is with Cuban Americans. So I'll get into a little bit of the history. And we will also be linking a ton of articles discussing the points. I'll try to kind of annotate my conversation as I go with the articles that I've been reading up on recently to understand the current situation, since of course my family doesn't have a ton of connection with Cuba now that we've immigrated, besides of course being born and raised in Miami. And we will try to do as good of a job with outlining the situation as possible, while also drawing upon the significance of the July 11th week events and everything that's been going on thereafter in Cuba.
Yeah, and we won't go into like a super crazy, well, more, I'm not going to the history. We won't go into a crazy deep history on everything because we're not historians. It's not our
Not
place.
professors.
We're not, absolutely not. We're 100 not that. But yeah, no, we just wanted to talk about it and how this kind of connects to people of our age range, of our generation, because we're seeing a lot of things happen right now in terms of whether it be just sad events like what's happened in Haiti with the assassination and then the earthquake and then the tropical storm, or what's happening in Afghanistan, or obviously with Cuba. So there's a lot happening right now, and it connects with us all in different ways. So that's really all what this episode will be about. First Cuba, then Afghanistan, Haiti must be saved for another time because there's so much happening there. But yeah, more take it away, get into the history, and then we'll get back to the present day.
One hot second just to verify one thing. Yeah, so the beginnings of Cuba, of course, Cuba was a Spanish colony, as most of Latin America was. There were a ton of slaves that were brought in from Africa to work the land, which contributes to our modern day mixture of races and ethnicities within Latin America. So in Cuba, for example, you have a full range of people who are super white, like myself, and you also have people who are super dark. And that's just kind of how, like, there's a term that for like the way that things have kind of panned out as far as all of that works. But like in a lot of other countries, the Spanish were kind of the people in power, and then of course you have the slaves, and that generational issue has progressed to where like people who are white typically do have money, and people who are African American or Afro-Caribbean tend to be poor, unfortunately, because that bridge just was never reached. And we still see that in the US. I mean, it's just intergenerational traumas, of course. Now, what we know of in the US as the Spanish American War is actually part of Cuba's independence war. So Cuba gained independence from Spain and then very quickly became kind of annexed by the US. So that's really the beginnings of the US's influence on Cuba and kind of pseudo-imperialism that happened to really kind of instill, oh no. Martin, what happened?
I don't know, but we're good.
Keep okay, cool. I was like, uh-oh, did we lose everything?
Don't, oh no, we're good.
Okay, cool. So after Cuba's independence, it suddenly became like intrinsically tied to the US financially and gubernatorially. And immediately after that, Cuba had a series of authoritarian leaders to then land on Castro, who was put up as this person who was going to bring about equality for Cubans, redistribute the wealth, like all of these promises that of course like appealed to people who had been oppressed, who were poor, who weren't able to kind of come back from those generations of like imperialism and authoritarianism. And as time went on, things obviously got worse. I'm gonna go to my link here now. So there's there was a professor at FIU who did a podcast recently with WBUR, and he spoke about the history of Cuba. So we'll link that in the description box. But when it came to Castro coming to power and Cuba aligning itself with some kind of global superpower, because of kind of the strange history with the US that Castro didn't agree with in terms of like capitalist interventionism, they aligned themselves with the Soviet Union, which resulted in 1971. In 1961, Cuba became a one-party state. So as like those ties strengthen, we see things like the Bay of Pigs operation. We see a ton of Russian involvement with Cuba, the Cuban Missile Crisis. We have heard about this for you've heard about this probably in the periphery of U.S. history, but this was all like centered within the Castro regime. And then, of course, in the 90s, with the fall of the Soviet Union, there's a lot of kind of conversation. And then, of course, in the 2000s, Castro dies, and then Raul comes to power, and then eventually both of the Castro family ceases to be ruling Cuba, and we now have a new leader. But all of that is to say that we've had over 60 years of communist dictatorship in Cuba, which, I mean, part of what today's discussion is about how it's been presented in the media as like kind of a political ploy when there are people who are truly suffering and trying to fight for freedom. And on our generational level, I think a lot of us want to be, myself excluded, heavily excluded. A lot of us want to be like pro-Marxism and like appreciate the idea of like redistributing the wealth and all of this stuff, but in that ignore the sufferings of people who are in authoritarian dictatorships and actual communist regimes. And part of why we want to bring about this topic today is just have conversation about like the situation in Cuba, highlighting people suffering and the kind of suffering they've had for years, and the rebellions that are going on now and what we hope for the future, acknowledging that like any regime where people are suffering to this level is not good, and therefore there is no defense for the communist regime that exists in Cuba.
Yeah, great point. Like this gets us right into where we are today. And last month, last month, like a little over a month ago.
Last month.
Before we go there, I think it's a really good point, and this won't really come up with Afghanistan because our relationship with that part of the world is just different. It's very
Totally different.
But just very different. But like you're saying about how there's, especially people of our age group, if they go to particular type of schools, you know, I would say more coming from a school like yours, a school like mine.
Yeah.
But shout out to the Pirates. But it is, there's a lot of, it's a feeling of wanting change. It's not a bad thing. Change can be great, but it's what we talked about this before we start recording. It comes from a place of privilege that's not acknowledged. And you mentioned how it's not acknowledging the sins of the past and the struggle. It's not acknowledging the fact that they're not acknowledging that, and that it's easy to say, oh, I want to redistribute the wealth when you're sitting on the wealth in your dorm at whatever top school or at your parents' crib in the burbs or wherever it is, right? That's typically the people who are talking about this. It's not typically people who don't have those experiences in America, because like they have other things to worry about. And maybe they would think about that if they think that way if they had the time, but they don't. That's, you know, a case study for another time, but it's something that we need to think about as young people who have had some level of, you know, higher education, that just because it sounds good doesn't mean it is good, and it doesn't mean that the implementation is or will be good. I'm not trying to say that I'm not trying to say capitalism is perfect. I'm not trying to say that Marxism and communism are all just like there's no possible way they can be done well, because I don't believe that either. That just doesn't make logical sense to me that there's just no possible way they can be done well. They haven't been done well so far, but that doesn't mean that there's no possible way they can be done well. You could argue a lot of things about capitalism not being done well so far, but yeah, depending on your political and economic persuasion. But we need to now acknowledge that about the situation, that there's a lot we don't know, in that it's far more simple than the fact of the economy comes up a lot with Cuba and with Afghanistan. We'll get into that, but it's more than the economy. It's about repression and oppression and not being able to walk the streets like you want to. And that's just not something that we can generally, some communities in America can relate to that strongly, but something that most people thankfully can't really get a grasp of.
Yeah. So kind of jumping off of that, I think Cuba is a really great example of all the ways in which political extremism can go wrong. Because a lot of the things that are currently happening in Cuba go directly against any tenet of like Marxism that assumes like redistribution of wealth for the broader benefit of society. For example, there was this article in the Washington Post that they recently came out with analyzing the current situation in Cuba and the way that politicians were talking about the situation. And one of the examples that they gave was a local merchant who was selling cheese. And he was selling cheese to local citizens, like his neighbors, his neighborhood, so on and so forth. And he was arrested because he had a private business. So Cuba puts people in jail when they don't solely work within the centralized state-controlled businesses, which, mind you, don't provide for the people. Like if you've seen pictures on Instagram of the rations given to the Cuban people every month, it's not enough to feed a family. And it's so expensive to buy meat that people just don't. And so any attempt to try to make people's lives better by like making your own cheese, or like even if you wanted to like sell cow meat, you couldn't, because the cows are technically owned by the government, so you'd get put into jail for that. And so it's this situation where like this extreme of like you cannot have any element of capitalism within the society, just it results in this oppression where you can't offer anything that you make to your neighbors out of fear for getting arrested, and you can't help people live healthy lives by producing more food because of these laws. And ironically, this has a lot to do with why people criticize the US embargo so much, that because Cuba no longer produces as much for its people as they did before, they rely a lot on importing goods from the US and other countries in its surrounding area. And so the US embargo and saying like, we're not going to do X, Y, and Z thing, that blocks those items from entering. And so I think that's where there's a lot of criticism for the US embargo, because people are saying like, oh, like this is preventing the Cuban people from having X. Yes and no. If the Cuban government allowed the Cuban people to have their own cows and like make their own meats and grow their own foods and sell their own stuff, like Cuba was relatively self-sufficient in like the 50s and the 40s beforehand. I mean, my family, we were farmers. We grew everything, and there was not much that they needed to import as far as like family meals were concerned, because they just ate what they grew on the land. And so I think that's where, I mean, a lot of politicians, especially on the left, have conflated the US embargo with the situation with the Cuban government. where it's like, yeah, it's not great that like we can't help the Cuban people out by sending them certain things, but at the same time, it would be nice if the Cuban government just let their people eat what they grew.
Yeah, completely agree. This will be in our resources in the show notes, but I was listening to a Vox podcast right before we hopped on, where it was talking about how there is the ability to have private business. It's just very few and far between, and specific places, in specific industries. But it's a problem, and we talked about this before as well. The alignment with Venezuela, another country with a whole lot of other issues as well. Actually, speaking of Venezuela, I'll add another little resource about them that I listened to not too long ago. There's a lot of reasons. If you hear that it's all it's America's fault that Cuba's where it is, that is not. We're not. We're not. We are culpable in some way because we've been all up putting our fingers all up in it. That's not inaccurate. And we were elbow deep in Afghanistan. We were past elbow deep in Afghanistan. We were armpit deep there, but we had our fingers all up in Cuba, and that's part of why we are where we are. Obviously, Barack Obama wanted to do something different in his term, by opening things up, and that did allow for some change and some privatization of businesses, even if it was on a small scale, just doing Airbnbs and Ubers and things of that nature. It opened up a possibility that wasn't there before. Things changed under Trump's administration, under his term, and here we are. And the connection with Venezuela and their up and down, mainly down, past decade, maybe decade and a half, also has hurt them. And then COVID, of course, has hurt everybody. But it's not all on us that we're here, that Cuba's at this place. So I just want to put that out there. There have been economic decisions that have gone back decades that have been poor, that have helped put them here. And it's not all about the economy, like we said before. It's about the ability to go out into the streets and just feel like you're safe and not be stressed about or being arrested because of something that you said, something that you did, because you're good at a sport, stuff like that. So it's deeper than just the economy. The economy leads to a lot of other things, a lot of other negative, whether it be health or educational impacts, but it's not all the economy, so we can't get caught up in that either.
Absolutely. And speaking about safety while being out on the streets, I mean, this also extends well past economic decisions. So even if you were pro all state controlled companies and commerce, I think one of the things that people tout communism for is this idea of like equality when it comes to social issues. And there was this very brave man who came out, named Roberto Alvarez, who is Afro-Cuban. And he came out to discuss the deep issues with racism in Cuba and police brutality, and talking about how like there is no such thing as equality in Cuba. I mean, yes, everyone is poor, but there is deeply entrenched racism in the country as well. And that like Afro-Cubans are very commonly targeted more often than white Cubans when it comes to like being arrested in the street or being called out for a certain quote unquote crime that may just be like speaking up. When it came to the protest, African Americans seem to be much more likely to be arrested or like beaten than any of their white counterparts. And so this concept that because they are communist, they don't have racism is outright incorrect. And a lot of people, while of course the island had access to internet, right now they're in pretty much darkness when it comes to access because the government has shut down a lot of that to avoid the world seeing what is going on. But a lot of Afro-Cubans have come out to talk about what is going on. And I saw another video of a woman, forget her name, another activist who currently lives in the United States, who spoke of her experiences in poverty in Cuba and saying that as an Afro-Cuban female, the way she made money and provided for her family was through prostitution, and that was the only way she could make money. And that because she was Afro-Cuban, she was able to get the business of Europeans and Canadians because of that, what the term, because of that tokenism.
Fetish
It
is
is
the word you want to use.
exact. There we that's it. Because of that fetish. And it is, I mean, seeing that video, I'm gonna look for it and see if I can find it, but it is so gut-wrenchingly disgusting to hear the ways in which people are being treated, and we can't keep our eyes closed to these just inhumane treatments of people, like in general, but also because of their race. Just because we perceive Cuba as a communist nation, and therefore because one of the tenets of communism is X'd, it must not have this. There's a human element in this situation, and that human element, I mean, for better or worse, like there is racism, and it is horrifying the ways in which Afro-Cubans are being treated in Cuba. And so I definitely wanted to touch on that in terms of the current situation, in addition to the economic situation, because I mean, I think we talk about this quite often on the podcast. It's something I feel very strongly that extremes don't really do us much good. And this attitude that I've personally seen on social media at times, where it's like, oh, like Cuba is a great example of Marxism, and therefore like it can't be all that bad, or like it's done X, Y, and Z good. Like just know, like we have to acknowledge that this is a huge issue. People are suffering, and like this level of extremism is bearing so much ugly, that to ignore that and instead tout like any kind of like, oh, but like X things, therefore Cuba can't be all that bad, and focus on that, like that's painful. And it's neglectful to the Cuban people, and it is the right word, and it is putting their issues under the carpet in favor of your personal like idea of what Marxism is, when like if you're critiquing any kind of society, if you're critiquing the US society for its flaws, we have to do that with everyone. And the situation in Cuba is not cute. It's ugly. It's terrible. And just because it's an example of communist failure doesn't mean that it deserves any less criticism than like the criticisms I see that are rampant about capitalism.
That's a great point. I think that takes us right into July 11th. And before we get there, I just want to touch on that thing about capitalism. We can't be, as Americans and other people from other capitalist nations who just love capitalism, we can't be cool with how capitalism works right now. I mean, there's a lot of great things about it for sure, but there's also things that allow people in this country where we have more food than we know to do with, where that allows people to be hungry, where we have so much space where we could potentially build homes. We allow people to be homeless and then criminalize them for it. That's less about, well, part capitalism, part law, but we can't sit on a high horse and think that, oh yeah, no, it's cool, it's good, it's Gucci. Because no, we're not in a place where we can really say that we're all good, because we're not, which we should know. There's a lot of incongruencies in all our language about things, whether it's written down or just how we act, and then how or how we talk to each other, our mythos or ethos, whatever, and how we actually go out and treat each other. So I'm gonna put that out there. But yeah, let's go straight to last month. You don't see people protesting when they're happy about stuff generally. That'd be a bit of a weird thing to do. So that really just just puts another emphasis on the fact that this has been a problem in Cuba for a long time, that people are finally fed up. And maybe you could say that COVID's really, the plague has really put that more into focus for people, or they're more desperate. And maybe both of those things are true. Maybe they're not true at all. But the fact that people are on the streets protesting all over the country, not just in Havana, not just in the countryside, all over, tells you something about what's going on. And that we need to have our eyes attuned to what's going on, and listen to what people are saying. Can we do anything about it on an individual level? I don't know, probably not. But we need to just be aware of what's happening outside of our borders, because even if it's a small country in comparison, they're really close to us. And troubles in Cuba mean trouble here. It'll become a political thing, a policy thing here, because it'll become a policy thing other places. That's why we got into Cuba in the first place. So just something that we need to make sure that we're aware of and question why we believe what we believe about it. Whether some people may say that they deserve something because it was a communist country. If that's your idea, I would question you to ask why and look deeper, but we just need to be aware and to really question why we think what we think, and what, if anything, what we as individuals can do beyond what our political leaders can do.
Absolutely. And after July 11th, there's been pretty much a blackout in Cuba. Over 200 people that have been recorded have been detained by the Cuban government. People have been murdered literally in the streets. People have been beaten up in the streets, and we no longer see as many videos as we did before because of the blackout, the internet blackout. And like Martin said, there is honestly not much that we can do, because money sent into Cuba a lot of times is intercepted by the government. A lot of packages are intercepted by the government. So it is really hard to know what there is to do. But I think on our side, it's important to stay informed, stay empathetic, and keep an eye out for opportunities that may come up to help out in the future. I know that the attitude with a lot of these protests, I've seen interviews happen where they've asked Cubans, like, how can people help? And I've seen the response of, which, I mean, if you're from Miami, like, this is a very similar attitude as a lot of Cuban families have. And it's like, this is our fight. We want to fight this fight for us. Which I think is a powerful position to be in, where they're like, we want to fight this for ourselves and for our future generations. So I think just keep an eye out, stay educated, stay updated. We're going to link articles. We're also going to link Instagram accounts of people who have been vocal activists. Some of them were recently incarcerated, but see if they're released. But yeah, important to stay aware, stay empathetic, and I think more than anything, acknowledge that some things are more important than our political ideologies, and really reflect, because I know our generation especially, I think, really gets bogged down in like, yes, these are my progressive views and this is how I feel about X, Y, and Z thing. And we forget that we can be wrong in the same way that people who, like, in the same way that climate deniers are wrong, and in the same way that people that say that a lot of, I mean, just look at 2020, play any, just so much about 2020. In the same way that we criticize that other people are wrong, we need to acknowledge when we are wrong. And so to all of everyone, think critically about your views, stay compassionate, and pray for Cuba.
Complete agree. Yes, completely agree. You can cut that bit out. How you ended is great. We'll just get straight to Afghanistan. Yeah, Afghanistan is just, oof. We told y'all this was going to be a fun one. So But we'll do a quick little history about this thing, which we shouldn't know much about because this thing got going when I was 3 and you were 2. Um, it's been a long 20, almost 20 years in Afghanistan. 20 years, not to the day, emotionally, 20 years to the day in a couple of weeks on September 11th. It'll be 20 years since we've been there. And the mandate personally doesn't make a lot of sense. I've been listening to a lot of different things about it. So the idea of stamping out terrorists, love it, cool, here for that. I will say that wars on nouns like war on drugs or war on poverty or war on crime or war on terrorism, you never win wars against nouns, you always lose. Nouns are undefeated. So just want to say that. But I get that. The idea of establishing an economy and a government was not a great idea. For a lot of reasons, it wasn't a great idea, but an admirable job. Also an arrogant ambition on our part, but we are Americans. That's what we do. We are confident, and I appreciate our confidence. I love that about us. But
overconfident.
In this regard, 100%, we are overconfident in our ability to set up all that and then split and have it be cool. There is very little way that was going to go down. And that turns out to be true because in the past 30-ish days, where I think most people, I can't think of many people who are like, no, y'all shouldn't have gotten out. I think we were all like, yeah, no, we got to take the L on this one. This hasn't gone like we wanted it to go. Let's get out. There's no real reason for us to keep on staying here. I'm cool with that. I'm down with that. But how it's gone down hasn't been anywhere near good enough. When an army falls without shooting too much, and we thought they were ready, tells us that we were not evaluating anywhere near well enough. And our lack of, and I'm gonna say our, because we are Americans, we voted for these folks who were culpable in a way. Our response and how we've gotten our citizens out and people who have put their lives and their families' lives on the line by helping us militarily with their translators or doctors or whatever, how we've not been ready to get them out of the country has been, in my point of view, that's the worst part. That's worse than leaving the air base in the middle of the night. That's weird. That's like when the Colts left Baltimore to go to Indianapolis. That was weird. This is even more weird than that. And then just leaving people just essentially just to fend for themselves and be like, okay, well, hopefully this works out for y'all. If it doesn't, oh well. That's kind of what we did. And that feels not, it feels American, but it also doesn't, right? Like, I'm going to be honest with you, like, I'm thinking out loud and feeling out loud in this one. It feels like something that we would do. Like when I heard that, I'm like, yeah, that sounds like us. Like we would do that, where we would say a thing and then not do the thing. That feels like us. But at the same time, we talk so much about not leaving our brothers behind. So it also doesn't feel right, but we still did that. Now we're trying to fix that, and we're going to, I think, it's not gonna take forever because we can't, because Taliban's gonna do what they're gonna do, but we're gonna fix that hopefully in the next few days to weeks. But we did just leave people to a terrorist group that we know were cutting off people's hands before, weren't letting women go to school. We're just like, yeah, all right. And that's really concerning. And I've heard I've seen a lot of different things on Twitter. I've listened to different podcasts where there's been talk about, well, why weren't you saying this 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago? And this is more reference to people who are older than us. For us, it doesn't really matter because we weren't anywhere near educated enough to say anything about anything related to literally any topic, except for maybe like the clothing we wear and the food we eat. But for others, like, you can't take time to care about everything going on in the world. There's been a lot of things that have happened in the past 20 years. We've had Hurricane Katrina, We've had a bunch of other hurricanes. We've had wildfires. We've had different pandemics epidemics, I guess. In the meantime, we've had racial uprisings. We've had the Arab Spring. There's been a lot of things that have happened in the past 20 years. We can't just care about everything all the time, right? But I think we really do need to, as American citizens, care about this. We decided to go to war, and a lot of people were on board 20 years ago under the idea that we're going to protect women and girls from a terrorist group and get back at them for coming at us, which I get. I'm cool with getting back at people for coming at us. We can't take a punch and not, throw a few haymakers back at people. I get that. It's not a good show of force. But when you expand to creating an economy and a government in a nation, in a land where you don't understand the culture, where we can't expect it to be America because it's not, that's really concerning. And I'll link some Freakonomics podcast where they had a whole, like a 3 or 4 part series about how America's different. And we
They
just
went
accept
off.
that. It was a great series where like we just gotta say like we're not Sweden, we're not Denmark, we're not China, we're our own unique self, which is great and also makes things harder. So we can't say, oh, because Sweden does it, we could do it, or just because we do it, others could do it. That's not what that means. If that's what that meant, everyone would copy our good stuff and leave all the crap stuff. And we would copy everyone else's good stuff, leave all the crap stuff. If it was that simple, but we can't do that. So I think that's all stuff that we need to in this situation where we got involved in something, made it bigger than maybe it needed to be, and then left in a bad way and left our allies in the truest sense, allies in the truest sense, people who truly sacrificed for us, for our safety, where we could just go about to the ice cream shop or head to a game or do whatever the heck. They were out there getting shot at. Their families were in danger actively. We left them hanging. So we need to think about that. And I'm not saying that you need to feel some extreme level of guilt, but to not think about it at all, I think is wrong and disrespectful to the sacrifice that they made. Because we'll think about our soldiers, about the American soldiers, those people that helped us there, the Afghans that helped us there, they're up there too. They risked a lot. They risked a lot to join the American cause.
Yeah, I think you covered it really well. I think as Americans, when we talk about like South Asia, the Middle East, whatever, however you want to identify the region, there's a lot of us, them that we talk about. And it really is what Martin's talking about, where like we were there for 20 years. And, it was wild because I heard it on the news and I was like, 20 years, like what happened 20 years ago? Like, and I didn't even connect the dots in my head until I was like, what happened 20 years ago that would cause this? Like, why have we been there? And then I was like, fuck, 9/11. This is it. This is the Taliban. Like this is why. And then I realized, I was like, oh my God, like this is happening because we went in there trying to do a thing, trying to quote unquote make things better. And that's part of why, like, I feel like the Cuba situation is so different from the Afghanistan situation, because we truly went in there with the goal of making change. And for the people who had suffered, I can't even begin to express how awful some of that is, because I can't imagine being a woman in that situation. Child marriages, they're just rape, complete lack of rights, not even being viewed as a human. To then have this kind of hope that things might change and buy into this goal that America had, and like Martin said, become an ally and fight for us. We really packed up and left. And after we left, like France had a plan for getting their people back. The UK had a plan for getting their people back. And when I say their people, I mean Afghans who worked with them and their countries while they were there, not just citizens of those countries. And we said nothing. We pulled out so quickly. And like, I don't know how we made that decision. It seems like something that should have been a more gradual process, something that should have been more kind of transitioned out in waves. I don't know what all the details were in that decision, obviously, because I don't work in the government. And even if even if I did know, I wouldn't be at liberty to disclose any of that stuff. But like, it blows my mind that we packed up our bags and it took us, did it take us like a week to say that we were going to go back and help people? Because the air stuff is recent.
Yeah. And now they got the one commercial airlines involved as well. And like obviously, like
Yeah.
it's not all gonna happen like that because it's not a massive airport, like you were saying. We got other countries trying to get their people out as well. So it's not just that simple. But
Mhm.
yeah. Before you keep going, I want to say that this is not simple. This was always going to be complex. And it was always going to be the most complex for us because we've been
Mhm.
the most heavy-handed in the region, or well, in the region and in this country specifically. It was always going
Mhm.
to be most complex for us. But that doesn't mean that we couldn't have done better. It was always going to be tough, but this could have been better. But continue.
Yeah. I mean, we just we disappeared overnight. And like, for something as big as changing a government and changing a governmental system, especially, I mean, the Taliban's never like fully gone away. They've always just kind of existed in I don't know if the shadows is the right word, but they've existed. They didn't just like go away. They've always been
Yeah.
there threatening to come back, saying, doing their shit. Um, and so, yeah, and I do want to say that one of the saddest parts of this whole thing is how little I am seeing on Instagram about it.
That's a really good, that's a great point. I mean, I'm going to give some of the people you're following a little benefit of the doubt and the fact that you're from Miami, so the Cuba connection will be stronger. I'll say that. But as a general point, totally with you. Like you said, it's us versus them. It's their brown folk that we don't care about, or their Muslims we don't care about. Whatever it is, the combo deal, whatever it is, it's 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 that I saw a tweet from a guy saying that he didn't that with showed a picture of a plane of refugees from Afghanistan flying some I don't know flying to America, not coming flying anywhere. First of all, crazy. First, that plane was huge, and it's crazy that they're all just standing in a plane that's flying. It's insane. But the dude was like, "Yeah, I don't want this plane coming to my area or whatever the heck." I'm like, dude, I mean, shoot. So you want them to just not get involved in the war so we can just come up, so they just come up over here, attack us again, or kill all our soldiers again? Who I'm sure you're backing our soldiers, right? I'm sure you're backing our service members, which you should, because they're taking a sacrifice that we would never take. But just sit here and just be like, yeah, I just don't understand. I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, I think my social media rant is not just towards social, but also towards like uh, when Black Lives Matter happened, it was a huge deal. Everyone posted their little black square, which, I mean, important.
What the heck was that, dog? I
That
didn't
was,
get
it was
that,
the
man.
silliest thing I've ever seen. But yes,
What the?
um,
At least
people even posted black squares without like hashtags or without direction to like what.
didn't make no sense, dog.
Yeah, yeah, that was one thing I did not do during that movement, and I had some people ask me why, and
Stupid.
I was like, how significant do you think that's going to be?
Nobody asked me nothing. So put that out there. Ain't nobody asked me nothing.
Yeah, I mean, it's, but yeah, people were posting their little black squares. And then when Cuba happened, people had a lot of different opinions, both that we shouldn't be criticizing Cuba and that we should be, and that we, and all this concern. And yet we get to Afghanistan, one of the biggest things that as the US, we have been single-handedly involved in as people who just did not belong there, but people who decided that we were going to try to do something there. And I'm seeing so few of us talking about it. And it's not even something that's really getting brought up that much in like normal media, like the television media. Like I'm hearing people just like talk about like celebrity gossip. And I'm like, what? And so, similar reiteration of the point, please read up on the situation, understand what's going on, and just provide compassion. Because I think one thing that Martin briefly touched on that we haven't discussed yet is that the US has some very deeply entrenched Islamophobia. And of course, not everyone in Afghanistan is Islam or is Muslim. There are Christians, there's all sorts of folks because it's a country, it's not a monolith. But I think we often have this attitude that when people are brown and of a different religion, we almost care less about them.
You can take the almost out of that. You can take the almost out.
And it's like people are people. And so many of those people fought with us because the Taliban are religious extremists. The KKK does not represent Christianity. And that's something that I saw on Instagram, which I thought was genius. Because if someone equated my beliefs to the KKK, I would be so deeply offended. And equating the Taliban to Islam is what we are, is
we let them cats
parallels.
go. We let them slide through all their stuff. Yeah. Yep. 100%.
So keep that in mind as you read, that if you have that lens of bias when you read about Afghanistan, that it's important to think of these folks as humans, people who don't want to get raped. Their women want to get an education. They want to not live in a place where their lives are at risk on a daily basis for like stupid reasons. So yeah, stay educated, stay aware. There are some organizations that are trying to help Afghan refugees in their transition to the US, helping foreign refugees as they enter other Western countries. That is one very easy way that we can all help, whether it's in terms of donations, financial, or just tangible items that they're in need of as they start bringing people over. But just keep an open mind. And this is not a situation where we're talking like quote unquote like illegal immigrants who are just like coming in across the border. We did this. These people are fleeing their country because we made some mistakes. So it is almost our job to welcome them with open arms. So stay educated. And yeah, that's my rant. I have many feelings about this.
Complete agree. Yeah. And this is an unfolding situation. So it's hard for us to say what's going to happen next. What we do know is that it's going to be weird is the wrong word. It's going to be something. I don't even know what word to use. It's going to be something. The Taliban have so far been different than what they were 20 years ago, but it doesn't mean they'll stay that way. We know we could say for a fact it'll be different for women, for sure. But we don't know how it's going to be for other people. So this is an unfolding situation that, like Maura said, we need to stay diligent with and we need to keep connected to. And hopefully we can have another episode later on where we don't have to be down about Afghanistan and what's happening. And we can say women can go to school past age 13. They don't have to wear, they don't have to be fully covered if they don't want to be fully covered. If you want to be fully covered, do your thing. But if you don't want to be, you don't have to be. Things like that. So but we'll get there when we get there. Hopefully, we'll see. It's an unraveling situation. Something will happen this week after this episode goes live. I can almost guarantee it. It's just that fast moving. But that's really all we have for y'all today. Anything else from you, Moira?
No, just stay educated. That's the number one thing we can do as Americans, and that's the number one thing that the world expects us not to do. So please stay educated.
That's true. We don't do a lot of caring about stuff outside of our borders. But again, I get why some people don't, because we got a lot of stuff going on. But for a fair amount of us, we have the mental capacity and the actual time to do it. So hopefully we can help y'all. And we're gonna have a lot of resources in the show notes, a few podcasts, some articles and things like that. But thank y'all for listening. There will be no one thing before we go this week. We'll save that for next week because this will be a long episode. But yes, thank y'all for listening, and we'll talk to y'all next week. Something that'll be more fun, much more fun next week.
Guaranteed.